is coming. Hallelujah. We shall see him. Hallelujah. In all of his glory.
Happy Sabbath, everyone. I invite you at this time to adopt a posture of reverence as we talk to God in prayer. Father in heaven, we thank you for spared life. We thank you for your many blessings towards us. We thank you for this opportunity of assembly, even though virtually. And we ask of you, O God, to be with tonight's program in a special way. We ask that you take full control, beat back the forces of the adversary. We ask that you be with all of the participants, be with the presenters, the moderators, even as we discuss and be a part of this very important subject of discussion. And we ask that by the end of tonight's program, we will be edified and blessed. So we give you the praise and the thanks. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen. Tonight, I am privileged to introduce to you our moderators. They are well equipped and knowledgeable to take us through the paces of tonight's program. So without any hesitation, I introduce to you tonight our moderators, Dr. Barbara Reynolds and Pastor Sion Bastiani.
Happy Sabbath, everyone. And good evening. Is Dr. Reynolds with us? Okay, I just spoke with her and she'll be here shortly. Before we go forward, I just want to welcome everyone here, and this is an important discussion that we need to have at this juncture. But before I go on, I would like to welcome the president of the Guyana Conference of Seventh-day Adventists, Pastor Exton Clark. I invite him now to say a few words to us, and we will proceed after that.
Good evening to everyone, and happy Sabbath.
Happy Sabbath.
It is my utmost joy and delight to welcome each one of you to this very special conversation on COVID-19 vaccination and the Seventh-day Adventist Church. I want to acknowledge our special guest on the platform and welcome them to the virtual space of Guyana. Our moderators, Dr. Barbara Reynolds and Pastor Sion Bastiani, my fellow administrators, all our members and friends, both local and overseas. I observe as well, we have some former administrators on. I noticed Dr. Garnett. I want to welcome all of you who have joined us on this virtual space. I want to particularly thank Pastor Usley Edwards for coordinating this initiative and our guest for accepting the invitation. It is evident that we have come to what some would describe as hellacious times as we battle with one of the world's most lethal pandemic within the past century. With an approximate 161 million cases and some 3.3 million deaths worldwide, with no end in sight to its ravaging effects, it stands to reason that even our technological and scientific advances have fallen exhausted at the gates of its attack. As a church which embraces and promotes health as a pivotal value, we believe that our posture should be to foster actions that are geared at protecting and preserving health. And we must do everything to counteract and stem the tide of this tragic disease. Here in Guyana, we must admit that we have seen a consistent rise in the number of cases in our country, not just in number of cases, but sadly, we have climbed to approximate 14,800 plus. But we have also been impacted by over 330 deaths to date. Incidentally, as a church, we have not been precluded from our contextual reality, since some of our members have contracted the disease, and as expected, we've had a few deaths as well. So the question tonight is, what actions can save us from the deadly jaws of COVID-19? Masking, social distancing, hand washing, or vaccinating? With the massive rolling out of an immunization program around the world, which is now in progress in Guyana, many of our members are hesitant and resistant to the idea of taking the COVID-19 vaccine. It's against this background that as a conference, we have brought on the forum tonight, 3 of our church's top professionals who will help to enlighten us about the COVID-19 vaccine, how it works, its composition, and the Seventh-day Adventist Church's position on this significant issue. It's my privilege and honor, brothers and sisters, to introduce you tonight our panelists. Firstly, Dr. Theodore Garnett. Welcome on board, the son of Dr. Hilton Garnett, former president of our conference. Dr. Theodore Garnett is a Loma Linda trained microbiologist and has done advanced studies in biomedical research. He currently serves as branch chief in the Office of Tissues and Advanced Therapies at the US Food and Drug Administration. Secondly, we are also honored to have Dr. Thomas Pizarro, who is a specialist in cardiology and internal medicine, and currently serves as the Chief of Medical Services at the New York State Veterans Nursing Home. And finally, one of the most distinguished sons of Guyana, Dr. Lael Caesar, who is celebrated as one of our leading theological scholars and writers, and is currently serving at the General Conference as assistant editor of our premier magazines or journals, Adventist Review and Adventist World. Brothers and sisters, I trust that as we have this engagement tonight, we shall all be inspired, enriched, and challenged as we participate in this vaccination conversation. Welcome to this platform, and may God bless you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Pastor Clark. At this moment, we will invite Brother Colin to sing for us.
Good evening, everyone. Happy Sabbath. Pastor Bastiani, I think that Brother Colvin Delph is not on, so perhaps we should proceed. Folks, welcome. There are 300 persons on the platform tonight. I feel I now understand how everyone feels when they play the lottery, because it was literally a lottery about getting on. So
Yes, it
welcome
was.
again and happy Sabbath. We're going to begin with a presentation from Dr. Theodore Garnett on how vaccines work. Dr. Garnett, as Pastor Clark just indicated, is the son of one of our beloved pastors of Central Church. I'll claim him from Central, but all across Guyana. And Dr. Garnett, welcome. You have the floor, sir, and you have 7 minutes, as Pastor Edwards would have told you. Thank you so much.
Good evening, everyone, and good night. It's a pleasure to join you virtually. I'd like to thank President Clark for the introduction and the Guyana Conference for the invitation to speak with you and to participate on this panel. I have a short presentation which I will be presenting, and I will pull it up right now on the screen. So I will be talking to you to get the conversation started on COVID-19 vaccines. How do they work? So the modern history of vaccines dates back to the late 1700s and 1800s, when vaccines were developed for smallpox and rabies. Vaccines have been used as a very successful public health tool to prevent and virtually eradicate many well-known deadly and debilitating infectious diseases, such as measles, mumps, polio, hepatitis, and flu. Early in the COVID-19 pandemic, a global effort was launched to quickly develop vaccines to mitigate the spread of the virus. Now, there are different types of COVID-19 vaccines. There are mRNA vaccines, such as the Pfizer and Moderna vaccines. There are adenovirus vector vaccines, such as the AstraZeneca, Johnson & Johnson, and the Sputnik V vaccine. There are inactivated virus vaccines, such as Coronavax and Covaxin. And then there are subunit vaccines, such as Novavax. So the last three types of vaccines are fairly common and well-known, and these vaccine platforms have been used in many existing vaccines. For example, the adenovirus vector vaccine platform was used to develop a vaccine for Ebola. The inactivated virus vaccines and the subunit vaccines have been used in other common types of vaccines. The mRNA vaccines, however, are newer and have been developed on a newer type of technology. And since these vaccines have generated a lot of interest, I'm just going to spend a short time discussing them. So mRNA vaccines take advantage of a process that cells use to make proteins in order to trigger an immune response. Like all vaccines, these mRNA COVID-19 vaccines have been rigorously tested for safety before they were authorized for use both in the US and around the world. The mRNA technology is not new. It has been developed or has been in development for a very long time, over a decade. And it's new, and it's also not unknown. mRNA vaccines do not contain live virus, and they do not carry the risk of causing disease in vaccinated persons. The mRNA in the vaccine never enters the nucleus and does not impact or interact with a person's DNA. So this is just an illustration of how the mRNA vaccines work when they are administered to a person. when they are injected into a person's arm, the mRNA, which is genetic material that encodes the spike protein of the virus, is conveyed into the cell by a lipid nanoparticle. And once that mRNA gets into the cell, that genetic material, it then results in the production of the spike protein of the virus, which elicits an immune response and ultimately gives you immunity against the virus. And the other vaccines, like the AstraZeneca vaccine, which is a vector-based vaccine and uses DNA, works in a similar fashion. The genetic material that in that vaccine, again, is conveyed to the cells by a common cold virus. But once that genetic material gets into the cells, it produces the spike protein, which elicits an immune response and gives you immunity to the virus. So there have been a lot of discussion and information regarding the validity of these vaccines. There have been a lot of misinformation, a lot of false claims being peddled on the internet and on social media. And here are just a few of them. The first one is we can't trust COVID-19 vaccines because they were rushed. It's true that the development of these vaccines was accelerated, but that's only because scientists had a head start on understanding coronaviruses and working with the technology. So that head start allowed the vaccines to be developed quickly. The second is the vaccine will give me COVID-19. That is not true. These vaccines do not contain live virus, so they cannot give you COVID-19. The third is we don't know what's inside these vaccines. Well, we actually do know. We know the ingredients, the components in these vaccines, and these vaccines have been rigorously tested and proven to be, or shown to be safe. Number four, these vaccines will alter my DNA. Well, I just mentioned that in the case of the mRNA vaccines and even the adenovirus vector vaccines that use genetic material like mRNA and DNA, this genetic material does not get into your nucleus where your genes and your genetic material, your genetic blueprint resides. So they do not interact. They are not gene therapy. They do not alter your DNA in any way. Once the genetic material is converted to proteins, it is destroyed and it does not pose any danger to your genes. The next is I already had COVID-19, so I wouldn't benefit from the vaccine.
Yes.
Well, we have discovered that even though you may get COVID-19 and develop natural immunity, it is not quite, we're not quite certain how long that immunity lasts. It may last just a few months, it may last longer. So getting the vaccine actually helps extend that immunity and give you a greater length of protection against the virus. And here in the US, the CDC is actively working with these vaccine companies to develop or authorize booster shots in the event that the protection does not last as long as we anticipate. Number six, since COVID-19 survival rate is so high, I don't need a vaccine. Well, this is also partly true. The survival rate of COVID-19 is pretty high, but we don't know who is going to be impacted severely and who is not. So, a lot of young people think, oh, the survival rate is high, I'm young, I'm strong, I'm healthy, I don't need a vaccine. But we have seen many cases of people who are seemingly healthy and strong getting sick, and not just sick, getting severely ill, hospitalized, and even dying. So in order to protect yourself, it's advised that you get the vaccine. Other myths include that the vaccine will make me sterile or infertile. Again, there's no evidence to support that. And lastly, vaccination will cause the virus to be hypermutate. Again, there's no evidence to support this claim. So the bottom line is these vaccines, most of them, particularly the ones that have been authorized by the Food and Drug Administration here in the US, the World Health Organization, and other regulatory bodies have been shown to be highly effective. They've been shown to be highly safe, and one can trust that if you are vaccinated, you will be protected from COVID-19. That's the end of my presentation, and I thank you for listening. I pass it off to the next panelist.
Thank you very much, Dr. Garnett. I am happy that you addressed many of the myths that are common, and I'm sure that we have been enlightened. There is just one question I would want to ask before you remove yourself from the mic, is based on your research or based on available data, have you uncovered any significant side effects to the vaccines?
Right, so there are side effects that are known, and I'm sure the next panelist, who is a medical doctor, can speak to these side effects in more detail. But one that is top of mind is the blood clots that have been associated with the AstraZeneca and the Johnson & Johnson vaccines. And I'm sure you've heard of blood clots in the brain that were discovered in a few people. But note that these side effects, this particular side effect, even though very severe, is extremely rare. So in the US, it was only detected in 32 people out of over 7 million people that took the vaccine. So these severe side effects, as we've seen with the Johnson & Johnson and AstraZeneca, and then previously there were reports of severe allergic reactions from the Pfizer and Moderna vaccines, are extremely rare. And the benefits of taking the vaccines way outweigh the risks. So yes, if you are unfortunate to be one of those people, you know, it's not good. But the point is, these side effects are extremely rare, and most people will just have very mild illness, a very mild reaction to taking these vaccines, or no reaction at all.
Dr. Reynolds, do you have a question or comment?
No, Pastor Bastiani. I would like now to segue to the next presentation from Dr. Thomas Bizarro on components of the COVID vaccine. Is the vaccine safe? Dr. Bizarro, welcome to the platform. You have the floor, sir.
Thank you very much for the invitation to share with you whatever knowledge I have on this subject. I think Dr. Garnett stole a little bit of my thunder, or a lot of my thunder. But basically what he said is true. There have been side effects of the type that you spoke about with the Johnson & Johnson and thrombosis that were formed. After investigation that the FDA had done, they found that really the incidence wasn't really any higher than what would be naturally occurring in those people. But they did put in a warning for females between the age of 18 and 48 to speak with their physician and gynecologist to make sure that they weren't prone to this particular problem. This usually occurred after 14 days, 7 to 14 days after injection, in contrast to most of the adverse reactions that you see, which are local. Remember now, this is a needle that's being injected into your arm, your deltoid muscle. So you get local swelling, erythema or redness, and tenderness. Some of the more prominent systemic adverse effects are really malaise, headache, some dizziness, a feeling of fatigue, bone pain, muscle pain, some nausea, intermittently fever. But you must remember, or you should remember, is that this is something that disappears within 48 hours. All right. So if you took the shot today, all right, by Sunday evening, you probably more than likely would not have any adverse reactions at all or any symptomatology. Specifically for the messenger RNA vaccines, being Pfizer and Moderna, which are 2-shot vaccines, the percentage of adverse reactions or side effects is higher in the second shot, and it stands to reason. The first shot is going to give you a baseline immunity. Your immune system has now been triggered to form its antibodies, okay? And 21 days later, all right, you have a standing army now ready of antibodies against the spike protein, all right? And when you are given the second shot 21 days or 28 days later, depending on which vaccine you receive, you are challenging the standing army and they will respond. So therefore, your side effects may be more prominent. All right, so back in December, when I had to answer that question to myself, is this vaccine safe? Doing my own research, I answered the question, yes, categorically. I took my shot in December, then again in early January, and we're now in May, and I've been perfectly fine. And I can tell you that I dealt with a number of people who had COVID, all right? And to that point, I never had antibodies, but that's a different discussion anyway. But what's in actually the vial that you are given, all right? And for the main is basically the liquid is salt, sugar, and potassium. That's both for Moderna and for Pfizer. All right. The J&J or Johnson & Johnson, as Dr. Garnett said, is a vector vaccine. So it has a adenovirus that's been made inactive, so it cannot cause any disease, even if it multiplies in your system. It has some citric acid, some ethanol, polysorbate, and salt with sodium chloride. But I think the question that people have on their mind is also something that Dr. Garnett mentioned, and that is the rapidity at which these vaccines were produced. Yes, it's true that the mRNA platform is approximately 10 to 12 years old now, all right? But the main thing, there are two main reasons why it was sped up. One, when you look at the FDA, how they operate and how vaccines or any medicine has to go through the research of the FDA or the satisfaction of the FDA, it's in phases. So the first phase would be phase 0, where research and development. Then you get phase 1, where you now have a vaccine that you want to test. So you test it on approximately 20 to 100 people who are volunteers, and you're looking for the dose, what side effects there are, and what's the immune response to each dose. And that goes on for a period of time, approximately a month or so. That information then has to be given to the FDA. And that after that, they are given the approval to move on to phase 2. Phase 2 is a greater number of people, all ethnicities, all sexes, and with morbidities, meaning congestive heart failure, diabetes, obesity, chronic obstructive pulmonary disease, all right? And the same thing occurs in that phase, all right? They monitor the doses, the adverse effects, and the immune response to each dose in those people, whether they're Caucasian, Black, Asian, have lung disease, have diabetes, are overweight, underweight, so forth and so on. In phase 3, we move on to 1,000 or more people. Actually, Moderna and Pfizer had somewhere approximately 34 to 35,000, and J&J, Johnson and Johnson, had approximately 40,000 people that were in the last phase, which lasts approximately 2 to 3 months. The reason it lasts 2 to 3 months is by evidence over the 70 years, or I should say the 50 years of vaccines, most severe side effects, for example, Guillain-Barré syndrome, all right, occur within a 60-day period post-vaccination. So the FDA and the scientific community felt that after 60 days, if nothing severe happened, the chances are close to zero that nothing severe is going to occur. All right. So you go into phase 3, you find the dose, or you have now the dose that you get the maximum immune response and the least side effects, and you work and see how well that occurs. All right. Then the FDA looks at your ability to manufacture the vaccine. All right. And they pass all this information on to other departments in the US government, but also scientific communities worldwide for their input. So that's how it normally happens. For these vaccines, the same thing occurred. What you have to know is that when you're doing it routinely, it's the pharmaceutical company that is investing their monies. What the United States government did, or the taxpayers did, all right, is they fronted the money for the pharmaceutical companies to go through the process. Because, why is that important? Because at any time in any of the phases, if it fails, all that money is lost, right? And I don't believe the stockholders would be very happy about losing millions of dollars or hundreds of millions of dollars. So the federal government in this country put up $1 billion so that these pharmaceuticals companies could go basically free, all right, to produce whatever they could produce. And at the end, if it was okayed and satisfactory to the FDA and all the scientific groups that it went through, they would not have lost any money, all right? And they can make whatever money they want afterward. The other thing that happened was that usually after each phase, the information is given to the appropriate committees and scientific communities. What happened with these vaccinations, all right, or vaccines, I should say, is that the information as it was ongoing and as it was being produced and as it was being found was forwarded to the FDA and the scientific communities, and therefore to the world scientific communities, for them to see on and to oversee whether it was true, false, or indifferent. All right. As they were ending phase 1, they began phase 2 before all of the data was presented, and that's how it got to the stage of approximately a year or so before we had needles going into the arms with a vaccine that is 95% effective when you're speaking about Moderna and Pfizer, and 74 or 70% with Johnson and Johnson. AstraZeneca is not in the United States, but I would assume that it's probably very similar to Johnson and Johnson because it too is a vector. It actually uses the same adenovirus. All right. The side effects, as I said, are minimal. They disappear within 48 hours, maximum 72 hours. All right, if you take some Tylenol right after, you probably won't have any side effects whatsoever. But it's not anything that would prevent an individual from taking the vaccine. I'm not here to force anybody to take the vaccine. I'm just here to give you information so that you can make your own decision based on data. And I think that's what Dr. Garnett basically already gave you. All right. Some of the stuff that you see and hear on the internet is so out of line that it's not even funny. All right. With regard to pregnancies, recently, Pfizer has done studies in pregnant women, and so far it seems that it doesn't has no effect. All right, but I would advise that you speak to your obstetrician. All right, if you plan on becoming pregnant or are already pregnant. If the only real true contraindication to taking is if you have anaphylaxis or you have severe allergies that lead to anaphylaxis, or that you're allergic to something that may be in the liquid itself. So if you had a terrible reaction or you did have an anaphylactic reaction to one of the first shots of the Moderna or the Pfizer vaccine, then obviously you should not take the second vaccine. That does not mean that you don't have some degree of immunity. Actually, in Israel, the Israelis have been doing studies, and they had actually limited the 2-shot vaccines to 1 shot and found that many of the people were able to have good immune response just to the 1 shot. The other thing that is recently coming out now, as time goes on, you have to remember that this is a new virus, a new disease, and these are new vaccines. So all the information that we may have on measles, mumps, and rubella, and all the other vaccines, we don't necessarily have on hand right now. But it appears that the vaccines may also blunt those of us who are vaccinated from giving COVID to those who are non-vaccinated. That the amount of inoculum or the number of viral particles is so markedly reduced that it would not actually cause disease in another individual. So these are all promising things. How long will your immune response last? Right now, it's up to about 8 months, proven. All right, there's a Dr. Coffey in San Diego who's been studying people who are in the Moderna Pfizer vaccine from last May. And he's already up, I think, to the end of January, February, people still having antibodies. So it's a safe, in my opinion, it's safe. I'm still here. My DNA is still the same. My hair is still white, all right? And I haven't changed, and I don't lay golden eggs. So I'm still the same human being I was when I was created, so.
Thank you, Dr. Bizzarro. Yes, we see that your hair is still white, and we don't sense that you lay any golden eggs. Just a bit of housekeeping. Thank you, Dr. Bizzarro. Dr. Bizzarro and Dr. Garnett, the volume appears slightly low. I know that Dr. Garnett, you were going in and out in terms of the volume, and Dr. Bizzarro, your volume was low throughout. So we've got some feedback, kindly asking for you to lift that volume. I've checked with the persons on the controlling the Zoom platform, and the volume is the highest. To all our participants, if you are on Facebook or you are on YouTube, please do post your questions on that chat function, and we have someone who will pick it up. I see that those who are in the Zoom room are already posting their questions. Before we go to Pastor Leal Caesar, we have received some information on how long the immunity lasts, about 8 months and counting. Known allergies or anaphylactic shocks are one possible risk. Pregnancies, no known maleffects, but check with the obstetrician. Adverse reactions are mild, very, very rare in terms of blood clots. I heard the number 32 out of 7 million people. I cannot calculate that percentage, but that is less than a couple of zeros and then a 1. And we also talked a little bit about mutations, either to Dr. Garnett or Dr. Bizarro. And Dr. Bizarro, you touched on this a little bit. In Guyana, we do not have Moderna and we do not have Pfizer. We have AstraZeneca, we have the Sputnik vaccine and the Sino vaccine. So it's an open question if either of you has any more data on the safety of the vaccines. I know you mentioned that the AstraZeneca is a little bit like the Johnson and Johnson vaccine because it followed the same format, for want of a more accurate scientific term. I'd just like to ask, there's some persons who have taken 1 shot of the vaccine, and you talked about having that army stand up and ready to act. What happens if an individual reneges on taking the 2nd dose because they forget or they can't find the card or they just feel safe and don't bother? So that's one question I'd like to ask from either of you gentlemen. And the second question we'd like to ask is, are there any potential psychosomatic side effects where people feel ill or feel somewhat, but it's not really physiological? And how is that person able to differentiate between the two and move on with his or her life? If we could just have quick, short answers to those questions, and then we want to segue to Pastor Caesar. Thank you, gentlemen.
I think with the 1 shot, you will get some degree of immunity. As I said, the Israelis have, I guess, proven that to a certain extent. You still have the option, if that person changes their mind, for up to, I think, almost 3 months before you can get the next shot. All right, you would be able to get it. All right, but if you do not, you're still going to have some degree of immunity.
Okay,
All right.
thank you, sir. And the other question, Dr. Garnett? Could you assist?
I think the other question is probably more appropriate for Dr. Bizarro, but I just want to piggyback on his answer to the first question, and then I'll give him a chance to answer the second question. So there was a study that recently came out that shows that just getting 1 shot and waiting for up to 12 weeks for the 2nd shot gives you pretty strong immunity after that 1 dose. I think in the case of Pfizer and probably Moderna as well, a study showed that you can get up to 80% efficacy after 4 weeks. So just getting 1 shot is pretty effective. And a point in case is what happened in the UK. They decided to delay the 2nd shot and just give folk 1 shot so they could vaccinate more people. And we see there that the cases have come down dramatically there. So, that's again evidence that even just 1 shot, is pretty effective.
Thank you, Dr. Garnett. Dr. Bizarro, would you like to hazard a guess at this psychosomatic? I'm not well. I have aches and pains that may not actually be real.
I don't have any information on the AstraZeneca or the Sputnik, but if they're vector viruses, I'm going to assume, as I said before, that the side effects would be probably the same as for Johnson and Johnson. That's all I can say on that.
Thank you, sir.
Okay. I see the questions rolling in, Dr. Reynolds. We just want to encourage folks to please ask 1 question and simple questions. Please don't ask complex questions, because there are so many questions and we want to give everybody an opportunity to ask, and we want to try to answer as much questions that we can within our given time. Our next speaker is Dr. Caesar, a renowned theologian. We give the way now for Dr. Caesar, and I'm sure we will be informed about the church's position on the vaccine.
Yes, share. Good evening, friends, saints, colleagues, sisters, brothers, my Guyanese people. This is a privilege to be able to interact with you. And it is also, of course, a solemn responsibility, not simply because one allegedly speaks for the church, but because of the obligation to speak truth to power. I'd like to indicate, first of all, some of the readily accessible material that has been turned out. President Clark said the Adventist Review is our premier magazine. Adventist Review and Adventist World. Adventist Review is a subscription magazine, but for Guyanese, for anybody outside of North America, you do not have to pay for. So this is information that would be readily available. And as a matter of fact, the online accessibility is times, multiplied times, what would be even for those who are paying for subscriptions. So I'd like to, first of all, offer some awareness, some of the responses that Adventist Review Ministries, which embraces both of those, Adventist Review and Adventist World, print magazines, and which goes beyond audio and video and other media. And we've provided responses as news items, information on the history of pandemics, advice and suggestions, what to do in lockdown times, etc. And I'd like to mention some of these. For example, in terms of news items, on the impact of the pandemic and how we coordinated support in hard-hit areas and between the church and ADRA and local governments or other NGOs or philanthropic organizations, scientific development, including how 2 Loma Linda students wrote and published an illustrated coronavirus children's book. All of these are the kinds of news items that would have been available as a result of your going to Adventist Review. Just go to the AdventistReview.org website, AdventistReview.org, and you can have a trove of information that will be beneficial to you. Also, on the history of pandemics, the medical, public health, economic, religious, political significance of pandemics. And for example, Pastor Preston Monterrey wrote an article called Pandemics and Christian Believers, which goes all the way back to the 2nd century AD, the pandemics and the Roman Empire, and then examples of advice. Yours truly wrote a 2-part series with another author on what to do in lockdown times. One of the articles was entitled COVID-19, Church, No, Time for Jesus, Yes. Then in terms of expert panel discussions, we had panels of medical authorities, of economists, of theologians. And once again, yours truly was on one of those theological panels, which was facilitated, moderated by my colleague and fellow associate editor of at Adventist Review Ministries, Dr. Gerald Klingbeil, along with other theologians, Rahel Wells and Frank Hazel. And we, on that particular panel, addressed the question, did God send COVID? And should governments be able to close churches? These are questions which have been raised not only across the US, but across the world. Moving right along, other news items. Oh, where am I now? I need to be, yes, other types of information and material that we made available. Commentary by Carlos Vallarta, a famous psychologist in Loma Linda, who wrote on the psychology of vaccine hesitancy. A lot more than we can say here in 7 to 10 to 15 minutes to 2 hours of a panel together would be yours by going to the AdventistReview.org website and making yourself familiar with the psychology of vaccine hesitancy. If you or a colleague, a friend, or a frenemy of yours is dubious about taking the vaccine, instead of an off-the-cuff answer, you can have a thought-through answer. Then we had stories. For example, one of them, a remarkable story of how an Adventist retirement home managed to stay COVID-19 free in Italy when the pandemic was raging in Italy. There were also testimonies and occasional messages from church leadership. Every now and then, Pastor Ted Wilson, as a matter of fact, he committed himself to doing this on a weekly basis, providing a message to the world, the church. In terms of official church pronouncements, I'd like to refer you, first of all, to a pronouncement on the church and immunization in general. And I've got highlighted here a paragraph from that statement. And maybe you can read it along with me. And once again, if you went to our website and looked for official church pronouncements, as a matter of fact, once you go to the website, you barely start scrolling and you see on the right that picture which appears on the screen right now. That landing page, that designated page was provided because we realized very early in the pandemic that whereas people are accustomed getting all kinds of news and information and stories and testimonies and devotionals and theological material and biblical studies from our website, people would want to know what they could have about the COVID-19 pandemic. So that page with the gloved hand and the other naked hand in it and says, click here for COVID-19 pandemic features. Once you go to the website and you click there, you can have, once again, as I said, a trove of information. And in terms of official church pronouncements, I'd like to just read these words which are accepted from the church's pronouncement on immunizations in general. And then I will also share briefly with you something of an official church pronouncement on COVID-19 in particular. Let it be noted that biblical instructions forbidding the consumption of unclean food and blood do not apply to vaccines. Why? The reason is obvious. Vaccines are produced as medication to save lives, not to serve as food. Then I also skipped this, and I think I should share it with you. We encourage, this is on immunization in general, and we encourage responsible immunization and vaccination and have no religious or faith-based reason not to encourage our adherents to responsibly participate in protective and preventive immunization programs. If I were to go on and speak at greater length about this, I would make the point that the will of God for you as a child of His is not limited to the idea that one of these days in the sweet by and by, we will be able to go home to our home in the sky and eat pie forever. As 3 John 2, and I'm going to read it from the New American Standard Bible. You are familiar with it from the King James Version. Beloved, I wish above all things that thou mayest prosper and be in health, even as thy soul prospereth. A modern version says, Beloved, I pray that in all respects you may prosper and be in good health, just as your soul prospers. And let me say this, whereas we have already indicated that none of us is responsible for making anybody take the vaccine. None of us has the authority to compel anybody else to take the vaccine. Whereas it may sound to some people when you say that as though apparently you are on the side of people who are cynical about the vaccine or are hostile to taking the vaccine. Or maybe if you listen to Dr. Pizarro and to Dr. Garnett, you will say, oh, they are on the side of trying to make people take the vaccine. I would like to have my freedom to make up my own mind. Well, you do, because it isn't a matter of whose side you're on. Are you on the side of good Guyanese bush medicine, or are you on the side of scientific, sophisticated scientific research? It is not a matter of sides, but a matter of respect for a power like his own power that your creator God has put into each one of us. It is the power of choice, as his end-time messenger, Ellen White, has put it, Education, page 17. She says, every human being created in the image of God is endowed with a power akin to that of the creator. Individuality, power to think and to do. So once you have heard the science from the scientists, and once you understand as a child of God that his commitment is for you to take care of your body just as surely as you take care of any other spiritual aspect of your being, once you've heard that, you have the privilege of acting intelligently and choosing the right option for your physical body and for your spiritual welfare. I'd like to close my remarks at that point and turn you back to the moderators. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Caesar. We want to encourage our viewers that we will be compiling your questions shortly to ask, and we will try to ask our panelists as much questions as possible. If we are unable to ask your questions, I apologize in advance. With that being said, I think we have a question for Dr. Caesar. There is a belief, and I think you're best to speak to this, that I don't need the vaccine because God will protect me. Can you speak to that?
I've heard that myself, and it does appear that there are lots of good Bible-believing, Jesus-following, cross-celebrating, grace-saved Christians who have felt that that is the enlightened option that they should exercise. I don't need the vaccine because my God will take care of me. I do not want to reduce our conversation to something episodic, and I just cite some incident here or there, and then somebody else has another story that makes the contrary point. But I do think that the example, the awkward and sad example of two different religious leaders in the early months of the pandemic, both of whom were convicted on this point and traveled from their positions in the north to locations in the south of the US where there were major meetings being held that they wanted to be a part of, rallies that they wanted to put their faith in with, and of individuals who were celebrating the fact that they were people of faith. And the incidents, the incidence of deaths from COVID-19 rose by 2 because these conscientious religious people, one of them, in fact, was never even able to get back home before he perished from having got an infection where he went down south to prove, to support Christian brothers and sisters of his who had the position, I want to demonstrate my faith in God by rushing into the lion's mouth. I think that God has promised in the book of Isaiah, when thou passest through the waters, I will be with thee, and through the rivers, they shall not overflow thee. When thou walkest through the fire, thou shalt not be burnt. Oops. I'm sorry, folks. Rest assured, it is not COVID-19. My dear wife and I are fully vaccinated, and thank God, Dr. Bizarro can attest. He's got his white hair I didn't have before I was vaccinated, and I still don't now that I've been vaccinated. So we are kind of equal on that. I was saying, when thou walkest through the fire, thou shalt not be burned. But that was no indication of the Holy Spirit that people should go into the fire. When Nebuchadnezzar threw Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego into the fire because they were committed to faith in God that didn't allow them to bow down to men or idols, Jesus preserved them and accompanied them in the flame. But that is entirely different from Lael Caesar deciding on his own to walk into a furnace.
Dr. Caesar, thank you so much. Could I ask that we segue just a little bit from the theology to the ethics, which are subsumed or informed by theology in some ways? What responsibility is mine to be fully vaccinated so that I develop some immunity vis-a-vis my fellow student in the classroom or co-worker, or the person sitting 6 feet away from me on the pew? Particularly those who wish to meet and greet, and we can't be sure that that person has been fully vaccinated. What is my ethical responsibility to that person and to myself and to those with whom I will then further come in contact?
Is the question directed to me?
Yes, Dr. Caesar.
I would hazard that my researcher scientist and my cardiologist should feel free to participate, because I am not an ethicist. And so you can't argue I'm not an ethicist, I'm a cardiologist. None of us here has those creds, but we know the Lord and we are aware, I would venture, we share faith in what's called the golden rule: all things whatsoever ye would that men should do to you, do ye also so to them. Do ye even to them likewise. And because if my neighbor knew that it was possible for her to infect me, one way or another, I would want her to take every precaution against such a development. For that reason, I feel obligated to take every precaution against doing anything that will in any way, shape, or form negatively impact the health of my neighbor, my brother or sister. And I think that I have good example in Jesus on choosing to go that way. The entire story of salvation is Jesus putting himself, is God the Father, the Son, the Spirit, putting themselves at every disadvantage for the sake of the best end result for me. So I love Jesus and love to follow him in such a practice.
Thank you, Pastor. You mentioned the power of choice, but you also juxtapose that with the privilege of choosing, and not everyone has the privilege. You earlier
Do
talked
our
about—
scientists have an option to respond? I'm not forcing them. I'm not the moderator, but I just want to make it clear that. Thank you, Dr.
Yes,
Dr. Randall. It's
we'll
your
definitely do
mic.
that. You also mentioned the responsibility, and that the church has no religious reason for encouraging its adherents not to be vaccinated. I'm going to repeat that again. The official position of the church is that it espouses responsible behavior, including vaccination, that vaccination is not a food, it's a medication, and that the church has no religious reason not to encourage its adherents to be vaccinated. And then you mentioned the obligation that we have, not just to ourselves, but to our fellow human beings, whether that person is in the public square, at work, or at school, or sitting on the pew next to us. It is my understanding, thank you, Pastor, that Brother Colwyn Delph is on the platform. Colwyn, if you on the platform, are you ready to sing now? And immediately after Colwyn sings, we will go to some questions on the Zoom platform as we wait for any. Dr. Garnett Jr., Dr. Theodore Garnett, I did post in a direct message to you on the Zoom chat, a question. Someone has been trying to get an answer to that chat. And I will say that there is Pastor Edwards, Pastor Clark, Pastor Mackenzie, there is from more than one person, or at least one person has posted this more than once in the chat, that since our panelists have spoken so beautifully about AstraZeneca, about Pfizer and Moderna, but we don't have Pfizer and Moderna in Guyana, that perhaps some similar information on the safety and how these vaccines that we have in Guyana were constructed, that's the AZ, the Sputnik, and the Sino vaccine, would not come amiss to the adherents of the faith. Colwyn, are you on?
Yes, I'm right here.
Go right on ahead. Take it away. Thank you so much. Please up your volume a little bit, Colwyn.
The army of Judah was paralyzed by fear when they heard a mighty multitude was quickly drawing near. But as they prayed for deliverance, the victory would begin. For when we call upon the Lord, we summon all of heaven. Pray on, for you are who the Lord is looking for. Pray on, for this will tear your mighty strongholds down. Stay on your knees, for this is where the battle is won. Very soon you win the victory. Pray on. When Daniel faced the lions for worshiping the Lord, there seemed there was no hope at all for what would be in store. But when we stand on holy ground, our smallest prayer is heard. Instead of on our circumstance, our eyes are on the Lord. Pray on, for you are who the Lord is looking for. Pray on, For this will tear those mighty strongholds down. Stay on your knees, for this is where the battle is won. Very soon you win the victory. Pray on. For when your questions go unanswered and your prayers they seem in vain, they don't seem to make a difference, they don't seem to make a change. Just rest assured God knows your needs and He hears each time you pray. Your prayers are reaching heaven, and the answer's on the way. Pray on, for you are who the Lord is looking for. Pray on, well, tear your mighty strongholds down. Stay on your knees, for this is where the battle is won. There's no better place for you to be than seeking the Father prayerfully. Very soon you win the victory. Pray on. All you have to do, just pray on.
Thank you, Colvin, as always. Right song for the right moment, beautifully sung, especially on Zoom, which is a platform that was not made for the transmission of music. We are just moving into questions more directly from the participants on YouTube, on Zoom, and on Facebook. There is a recurring question about why not a vaccine for cancer? There is an answer that was posted to chat, but if any of our panelists has a specific answer and would like to put there. And then there's a recurring question about an alleged autopsy that suggests that COVID-19 is not a virus, but it's a bacterium. Again, if we could have a quick scientific confirmation or otherwise of that, that would be helpful. Dr. Caesar, I see a question here that says, should the church obey the laws set out by the government due to the COVID? I think that this is an oft repeated question to Adventists, and I'd like you to give a short, clear answer to that, please. Dr. Garnett, Dr. Bizarro, any responses on those first two questions? And please feel welcome, as Dr. Caesar pointed out, if you want to respond on the ethics of the responsibility for being vaccinated when we come in contact with others who don't know whether we have been vaccinated or not. Thank you very much.
On the previous question before the song, with the Sinovac and the Sputnik, I just looked it up. With Sputnik, the virus, the adenovirus, the Trojan horse, as I like to call it, is actually a killed virus. And the side effects are basically the same. All right. And the Sinovac, which is the Chinese version, all right, their efficacy is approximately 50%, in contrast to Moderna, Pfizer, and J&J and AstraZeneca, which are a lot higher with regard to that. What was the first question that you asked before?
There's a question, it's either someone has posted it twice or it's a recurring question about whether COVID-19 is a bacterium that was discovered through an autopsy or whether it is a virus. I know we know the answer, but maybe we can just put it to bed now if you would give a clear and concise answer to that.
You think about it this way: if it was a bacteria and it's a virus, let's say it's a virus, okay, without question, it belongs to the corona family of viruses, which is a respiratory virus, which causes approximately 20% of the upper respiratory infections across the world. All right. If this was a bacteria, I shouldn't say if, we made a vaccine from this particular organism or virus. All right. We took the nucleic acid code to make the spike and put it in a nanoparticle of cholesterol and injected it into human beings. All right. And we have immunity against the COVID virus that's out there that we're dealing with. And we've seen, as Dr. Garnett has said, the death rate and infection rate is dropping across the world. Maybe not as quickly as we would like it, all right, but it is dropping across the world. Bacteria are treated with antibiotics. Viruses are not. Okay, so I don't think there's any question that this is a virus. I mean, I don't know what people individually believe, but it came from a virology lab. It was being studied in a virology lab, not a bacteria lab or a bacterium. That's my answer.
Thank you, Dr. Bizzaro.
This is Dr. Garnett. Just to answer the question on cancer and COVID-19. So I think the question was, we have vaccines for COVID-19. We don't have vaccines for cancer, which has killed many more people. Now, cancer and COVID-19 are fundamentally different diseases. COVID-19, a respiratory disease, is caused by coronavirus, SARS-CoV-2. Cancer is a collection of maladies, manifested in cells that mutate and then replicate out of control. Now, there are cancers that are caused by microorganisms. Like, so HPV, a virus, has been implicated in the etiology of cervical cancer. So there are vaccines, cancer vaccines that target HPV to, prevent it from causing cervical cancer. So there is some intersection there, but generally cancers, and Dr. Bizzaro can speak to this, are treated with chemotherapy, radiation therapy to destroy those cells that are cancerous.
That's true, but I think what's important and what is unique about the newer platforms, being the messenger RNA, is that what was done, obviously, is we were able to decipher what the code was for that particular problem, the antigen. All right, and just as Dr. Garnett just said, a cancer is a normal cell that goes haywire. It becomes mitotic and it becomes abnormal. If you were able to identify what made that cell bizarre or abnormal, all right, and were able to decode it, put it into a nanoparticle and inject it, you may be able to prevent the spread or the metastasis of that particular tumor. I'm not saying that's what can be done. I'm just theorizing, but I think that is a pathway that this particular platform of a decade old has opened. All right, I'm sure for hemopoietic or blood cancers, that is probably more prone or lends itself to that particular manipulation than, say, solid tumors. But the idea is that it's a normal cell that has lost its normal pathway of reproduction. And that's basically how variants of the COVID are happening, is that in the reproduction of the COVID virus, as it reproduces, it's supposed to reproduce itself, correct? All right, but in reality, there are mistakes that occur. And the mistakes have become the variants. And yes, some of these variants are more infectious, but apparently they are less lethal because the death rates are going down, over and beyond the fact that those people who have been vaccinated do come across and do contract and do test positive, but they're asymptomatic. They have no symptoms. All right. So there is some truth to the fact that the vaccines, I would assume all of them, I can only speak of the 3 that we use in the United States. All right, but I'm sure that all of them have some degree of cross-reactivity with the variants. And let me just say one thing, because I mentioned that the China vac was 50% effective. If I told you that the flu vaccine that a lot of people get every year has a range of 40%, all right? So when you're talking about something that's 50, 75, 90, 95%, these are remarkable findings. These are remarkable when you think about it. We're happy to take a shot in this country, those of us who take it every September for the flu, all right, because there's a new variant that they added to the vaccine, all right, and that too may happen with COVID. It may turn out to be that you need a booster or you need the variants in order to improve your standing army's response to whatever may be out there. And believe me, this is not going away. This virus is not going away. If it was going to burn out like MERS did, all right, it would have burned out by now. It is not going to burn out, and it's not going away.
I know you asked me the religious liberty question, but before I respond to it, I want to wander beyond the area of my competence and ask myself the question that was just posed. Why don't we have a cure for cancer when we've got the vaccine for COVID-19? I think the straightforward answer is, well, some things are harder than other things.
Correct. Absolutely.
That's it. It isn't that the scientific community doesn't care. It isn't that COVID-19 is a joke, so we have a toy for everybody to play with. It is that some things in my individual and personal life, problems are intractable. I can't get the victory over. I can't get the mastery. And as a human race, we are coping to some degree, but we are not capable of coping with everything. We do our best, and hats off to the scientific community. And what they need is our support and prayers and faith, much more so than, a skeptical, so why don't they fix that?
Well, I believe that messenger RNA may be the beginning, opening of
the beginning of God grant. In terms of the religious liberty question, I'd like to mention 2 names for you. Once again, go to the AdventistReview.org site, AdventistReview.org, and look for Malcolm Russell. Malcolm Russell. Last year, one of our standout articles was written by Malcolm Russell, who is a brilliant and celebrated and now retired economist. And he wrote on the pandemic, socioeconomic impacts, and Adventism. And in his address to that question, he dealt with religious liberty and asked the question, are pandemics a threat? The other name I want to mention is Brad Thorpe. Brad Thorpe may be a familiar name to many of you because he ran Hope Channel. He was in charge. He was the president and CEO. He retired a few years ago, but he wrote an article which is coming up. I'm giving you inside stuff. It's coming up. Keep your eyes peeled and open for an article by Brad Thorpe entitled COVID-19 and the Worship Crowd. It's a question, COVID-19 and the worship crowd. It's a question that addresses the same matter and very carefully and methodically handles and deals with the different objections and concerns and makes valid points. For example, he says, why are they allowing restaurants to open and the churches still are not. Of course, you understand that situations vary not just from nation to nation, but state to state and county to county. So what I say or what he says may be true here and not true there, but we can still have the conversation. So he says, why are they allowing restaurants to open and still have churches closed? Should everybody offer sandwiches at the door of the church and that would allow churches to open too? He's being facetious to some extent, but the point I'm making is this question that you are raising has been given thought, and whereas I can say in 15 seconds, we do not believe that the issue of church closing is a religious liberty issue. It is a public health issue. I can say that in 10, 15 seconds, but you can get more if you go to AdventistReview.org and find Malcolm Russell's article on pandemics and Adventism. Or if you go to AdventistReview.org next month, and I shouldn't be doing this, should I? Well, I'm giving you a leg up, an advantage. And look for Brad Thorpe and his question, pandemics and the COVID crowd, and that may help you process that question some more. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I'm noticing that a few persons may have joined the conversation a bit late, and the recurring question of how come this vaccine took such a short period to be developed. I know we have answered that question, but to the benefit of those persons who were not here, could you please speak to it again? Secondly, we're from the Caribbean, so we have a lot of herbal medications, and we have so many home remedies. And so the question is being asked, should I be vaccinated, or why not just focus on building my immune system? And shouldn't that be enough?
Okay, let me answer the second one first because it's shorter. I think, yes, you should build your immune system or maintain homeostasis of the immune system, okay? So whatever you need to take to keep your immune cells and immune function functioning the way we were created for it to function, that you should do. The natural diet and health methods of Adventism should be followed. It should be followed because it keeps you in your tip-top shape. One of the primary causes, or one of the primary morbidities of COVID is obesity. All right, diabetes, hypertension, all right, heart disease. I'm not going to, also COPD, but those of us, we're not supposed to be smoking, so therefore we shouldn't have chronic obstructive pulmonary disease unless we have some other problem. So yes, eating properly, keeping yourself in the best physical shape and mental shape is what we should be doing. But beyond that, we have to do what we have to do. I mean, the COVID vaccine was created by mankind, who gave that individual African-American scientist, doctor, a female, that knowledge to come up with this 10 years ago. And she works at the NIH, all right? So God gave her that ability. Now, to answer your question, or the question about how come it got so quickly done, the main reason, it went through the same parameters, the same phases that every other vaccine and every other medication has to go through. As I said, it's really a financial, they did two things. They backed the monies for the pharmaceutical companies, so there was no downside to them, even if whatever they research and development that they had done or whatever phase they had reached before it was crushed, they wouldn't lose any money and the stockholders would be happy. At the same time, as the data was being forthcoming, it was forthcoming to the FDA, the scientific communities in this country and throughout the world, and feedback was received from throughout the world. And there are smart people outside of the United States, believe me. All right. And that information was fed back in. So we had the pluses and the minuses and the questions and the answers. All right. So all things were flowing together. There was a cooperation that normally does not occur. All right. It usually occurs in stages. This was more of an intermingling at the same time that the phases were going on. This is why it took only a year. All right. The last, which something I didn't mention before, but specifically for the messenger RNA, that can be reproduced in a lab. You get the sequence, which they knew in January of 2020. They knew the sequence to form the spike protein. All right. They replicated it in the lab and they started off on the vaccine. The rest of the time was all process and procedure that the FDA and the scientific communities need to have done before they clear it for use in human beings. That's the real reason.
Thank you, Thank you, Dr. Bizarro. 2 questions, the should I question. Should I take the vaccine if I have cancer? And should I take the vaccine if I'm breastfeeding? Could we have an answer? Should I take the vaccine if I have cancer? And should I take the vaccine if I'm breastfeeding? And no, it was not from the same person.
Okay. With regard to the cancer, the first thing to do would be to ask your oncologist, but more than likely the answer is going to be yes. The reason I say ask them, because if the person is receiving chemotherapy or immunotherapy, you want the individual to be able to respond, so it's a timing issue. All right, but the answer should be yes, because those people are immune suppressed. They're immune suppressed by the medication that they're getting in order to treat their other medical problem. The breastfeeding is still up in the air, from what I understand, as far as I know, at this time. So I think that would be better asked to your gynecologist or your obstetrician at this point. All right, or your virologist or immunologist. All right, but I think it's still up to be studied or still in the process of being studied, and nothing definitive as far as I know anyway.
Thank you, Dr. Bizarro. Pastor, Dr. Caesar, were you about to say something? Sorry, I still call you Pastor Caesar after all of these years. My apologies. Were you about to say something?
I don't think so, Dr. Reynolds, except it was that Dr. Garnett wanted to say something.
Yeah,
Oh, it was Dr. Garnett. My apologies, because you know, with
No,
Zoom, your eyes keep shifting. You know, my apologies, Dr. Garnett. And Dr. Garnett, in my screen, you're immediately above one of my favorite pastors, Pastor Hilton Garnett,
Mm.
who
Okay.
prays like no one that I know, even if it's for 40 minutes. Yes, Dr. Garnett.
True. Yeah, I just wanted to quickly add to something that Dr. Bizarro said about the discussion regarding health, maintaining one's health and one's chances of getting infected. You know, everything he said is obviously true about, you know, underlying diseases being, putting one at risk for COVID-19. And I just want to add to that by saying seemingly healthy people have also come down with the virus, have also contracted the virus, even gotten severely ill and died. We obviously don't know their medical history. You know, only their doctor or physician would know that. So the point is, yes, it's important to maintain one's health, you know, to eat properly, you know, exercise, all of those good things. But, you know, just the appearance of health or thinking that one is healthy, you know, is not enough to assure you that you will not get infected or not get seriously ill from COVID-19. So, you know, that's just a cautionary tale, something to be aware of in this debate.
No, I agree with what you're saying. My intent was to say that the idea is to reduce your morbidities by keeping yourself as healthy as possible. Obviously, young people have died, all right, even if they are in great shape, all right, but the vast majority of people who have lost their lives with COVID-19 are those who are over 65, all right, and those who have morbidities. And as I said before, obesity is one of the number one morbidity with regard to having a problem with COVID-19.
Obesity, you said, Dr. Bizarro?
Obesity, overweight.
I just wanted to repeat it. Here in the Caribbean, we like carbohydrates, and sometimes we add pasta on top of rice or potato on top of bread. So I just wanted to repeat it in terms of what we call garnishing. We garnish potatoes with rice. There is a question here, and we're down to 9:18, so we'll perhaps take the last two questions as we begin to wrap up. Recently, there have been instances of states making COVID-19 vaccines mandatory, failing which persons stand to lose their livelihood. What is the church's stance on mandatory vaccines? And I'll pass that to Pastor Dr. Caesar and any of the officials of the church who'd like to comment on that. There is also an underlying question here. Is this platform to push vaccination? And we'd like a clear statement on that from maybe Pastor Clark or Pastor Edwards. Is this platform this evening designed to push vaccination? Dr. Caesar.
I'm not entirely sure why you don't think I deserve the title of pastor anymore.
It just dates us.
It's heartbreaking. I think we have indicated as we've gone along this evening that the responsibility of the individual to think and to do is something that God himself put into us. And as Ellen White defines it, as our individuality. If it is taken away from us, we are denied the core of our existence. Our distinctiveness is not how tall, short, haired, or unhaired we may be. It is our ability to think and to do. And without wandering into the responsibilities of administration of the Guyana Conference, I'd say that my participation here, I see as the privilege of sharing with others for their benefit, and sharing not only what the church thinks, which is what I'm asked to talk about, but what I myself think. I think that my church makes good sense following the science. The fact is that every time Adventist Review or Adventist World has an article or even is publishing a letter to the editor that has to do with science, medicine, theology, we consult, not well, maybe with theology, there are several theologians who are members of staff, but particularly the science and the public health, that kind of stuff, before we run it in our pages, before we run it online, we check with the scholars, with the scientists, because we believe that God has kept his promise. If you lack wisdom, ask of God, who gives liberally and doesn't hold back. And we believe that there are many among us who understand, whose wisdom is not the wisdom of this world, but the wisdom which is from God. And we are privileged to consult with them. And that's why we have Loma Linda University. And Loma Linda is one of more than half a dozen medical schools we have across the world. I had the privilege of being in Nigeria for the opening of the Ben Carson School of Medicine a few years ago. We believe in science. We do not juxtapose science over against bush medicine and say one is bad and the other is good. So that if you are going to get inoculations and vaccination, it means that your bush tea is despised. There may be other reasons why you are cautious about the bush tea or the vaccinations, but it shouldn't be because we believe that if I drink my bush tea, then I should not take vaccinations, because that puts me at a disadvantage. I heard somebody say, excuse me, and they said it not just in my hearing, but but to me, I'm not putting, actually, they were repeating this saying, I'm not putting anything into my body. I said, folks, stuff is going into your body all the time, whether you put it there or not. We need to be completely aware of that. And some of the things that you can put into your body to protect you from stuff that's going in there, even though you didn't want it to, are also things we can put into our body because they will protect us from some of the things we think are good to put, but don't have the scientific information to back them up. Then we may be going up the wrong road.
Thank you, Pastor Caesar. Pastor Bastiani.
Yes, Dr. Reynolds, I just thought I should comment on the question or the statement by one of the viewers. I think because of honesty, I should. In talking with Pastor about this program, he made something clear to us, that the purpose of this program was chiefly to give information. And when the information is given, it should decide what is best for them. And so while I am not at liberty to speak on the position of the conference, I can say, by all information and indication given to me by Pastor Audley Edwards, that this program is not about pushing persons to be vaccinated rather, or not to be vaccinated. It's rather giving the members information, and they can make a sound and informed decision based on facts, truth, and not myths. Okay, we're at 9:25. And so what we're going to do now, we're going to allow the presenters, after doing such a wonderful job, we're going to ask you to, for 1 minute, to just sum up your presentations, say something to us. But if you may, I was reading the new guidelines by the CDC. Could you please speak to it for just a half of a second? Well, that's not possible. Half of a minute while you make your closing remarks.
Okay, my closing remarks, I want to reiterate what I said before. One, I'm not here to try to force anybody to take a vaccine. I'm here to give you information so that you can make your own decision based on facts and research, right? With regard to forcing, there was a question before, forcing people to take the vaccine, the government. As far as the United States is concerned, this is an emergency use authorization, which means the government cannot force you to take it. The problem is corporations or schools or private schools can force you to take it and not let you work or enter their school. With regard to my closing statement, as I said before, COVID-19 is not going away. All right, it's not going to burn itself out. And the only way that we're going to be able to put this behind us is to reach herd immunity. The only way to reach herd immunity is to either get the disease and survive with God's grace, or to be vaccinated. And when the world gets to herd immunity, you won't hear about it. All right, you don't, in the United States, we don't hear about measles. We don't hear about mumps, because people were vaccinated. All right, and when those religious sects, especially Hasidic Jews who don't believe in vaccinations, when they immigrated from Israel or Germany or wherever, all right, or Russia, they came here and there was a breakout in New York State of measles because they weren't vaccinated. All right, that's the whole purpose. The disease, the virus is not going to disappear. It doesn't go away. It's still around. It's still around and it will always be around, whether it's measles, mumps, or whether now it's COVID-19. All right, this was a pandemic. It's not the only pandemic that we had in the lifetime, in the world's lifetime. All right, and I'm sure that it will not be the last pandemic. All right, but the only thing to do at this particular point in time is to get the information, look for it, read it, try to decipher it, and come to make your own decision. It's a personal decision. This is not somebody, I'm not forcing you to take vaccines, believe me. I have to give my 2 children who are young or teenagers, I thought about it, whether they should get the vaccine or not, because even if they get exposed, the chances are that they're going to have a mild case. But why subject them, as Dr. Garnett said, despite the fact that they're young? Anything can happen, and I don't know that. I don't know what can happen. So therefore, the vaccine is safe. I'm going out Sunday morning, and they're both going to get their vaccination. And that's a decision I made. Actually, my son asked me for the vaccination. All right. And that's the way it is. I didn't force on him. I was actually hesitant to think about it. But the point of the scenario is give it to them. If they're asking for it, make a decision and go for it. The chances are nothing's going to happen to you at all, other than a sore arm, headache, feeling tired, all right, and restless or whatever. And within 48 hours, it'll be over. I appreciate the opportunity that you all gave me. Hopefully I was lucid enough and was able to explain and answer whatever questions.
Amen.
All right. Thank you very much.
So this is Dr. Garnett. I'd like to first of all thank the Guyana Conference for giving me the opportunity to participate on this panel. Thank my fellow panelists for a very interesting and informative discussion. And I would just like to leave you with this. As the other panelists have said, we're not here to force anyone, to guilt anyone necessarily into taking the vaccine. We're here to provide information. And as Dr. Caesar so eloquently said, God has given us a freedom of choice, and that's a sacred right. So we've provided the information, and it's up to those of you who are listening to make that decision. But I would say that the vaccine gives us the best shot, I think, of beating the pandemic and getting back to some level of normalcy. And I'm sure everyone wants to, get back to pre-COVID activities and be able to move around without having to wear a mask or worry about distancing, etc. And I think the vaccine puts us in that position. As I mentioned, the studies show that they're safe and effective, and we see the results. Not everywhere as yet, but in places like the UK and Israel, and even here in the US, we see that the proliferation of vaccination has allowed us to, reduce these restrictions, so that as of today, the CDC is saying here in the US that you don't have to wear a mask in most places if you're vaccinated. You can exercise outside, you can even be indoors without a mask. And that's all because we were able to bring down the cases, bring down the deaths and hospitalizations due to vaccination. So again, we provided the information, and we trust that individuals will use their best judgment to do what's right for themselves and for their families.
I'm going to ask the screen to help me. Let's do this. I think it's beneficial to recognize that what we are engaged in our conversation about vaccines and COVID-19 is not distinct from what we are involved in on a continuing basis. Long before we ever heard about the 19th COVID, there was a war mostly unseen going on, and it's Christ against Satan and truth against the father of lies, the resurrection and the life versus the one who brought sin into the world and death by sin. And I think the words of Jesus in Matthew 23 and John 8 are both apropos at this time. As I mentioned a few moments ago, we tend sometimes to set one thing that may be a good thing over against another thing that is also a good thing. And often enough, we prefer the good thing that we know better, and sometimes deny ourselves the better thing that we don't know well. I want to encourage you to do the one and the other if you think that both are warranted. But more than anything else, I'd like to close with Jesus' remark in John 8:32. You will know the truth, and the truth
will set you free.
Will make you free. There is a lot we don't know until the research comes our way. And there's a lot we leaned on because the folks before us taught us to lean on these things. I'm a Guyanese, or I'm from Buxton, or I'm a Linden, or whatever, Barakara, and these are the markers of, yo soy Hernandez, así son los Hernandez, or whatever, We have every right to be who we are, but we also have the privilege of growing. And if we find it so difficult to accept new information coming from science, we may find heaven a very difficult place, because it's going to be learning and growing all the time. You will know the truth.
The truth shall set you.
And the truth will make you free. God bless you all. It's been a privilege to be on with Teddy and the doctor and Dr. Reynolds and all the rest of you whose names I can't list. May the Lord of truth wash over us and work inside us and clean us up with his truth, so we can go to where there will only be truth, and we will be learning and growing forever and ever and ever and ever and ever and ever.
Now I can truly say, Pastor Caesar, I have the privilege to ask Pastor Exton Clark, the president of the Guyana Conference, to make his brief closing remarks. Thereafter, Pastor Sion Bastiani and I will yield the microphone to Elder Deborah Trotman, who will do the official vote of thanks, followed by Pastor Hugh Mackenzie, who will either sing or announce the closing hymn. And the closing prayer will be offered by Elder Deborah Jupiter. Again, I'd like to salute Pastor Bastiani, my co-conspirator here, Pastor Edwards, who asked us to do this. It's been a pleasure. I've learned a lot, and I cede the microphone to Pastor Exton Clark. Happy Sabbath, everybody.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you, Dr. Reynolds. And there's someone who is identified to do the closing remarks. Sister Jupiter, but I just thought it would have been appropriate for me just to say that the intent of this program was not to push the issue of vaccination. The intent is to push perspectives, to push prevention of COVID-19, to push protection, and of course, to promote the various views and concepts that will kind of be a catalyst in helping in pushing us to do further research and to gain more knowledge on the related issues. I just want to make the statement that the Seventh-day Adventist Church is clear, its position is clear, that we are not the conscience of any individual, and that the choice to or not to immunize remains in the hand of individual choice. But it is our hope as a conference that that choice will result in the preservation of life. And of course, healthy members will obviously result in healthier churches and thereby healthier communities and societies. Thank you for coming on board tonight and for all those who would have contributed to make this a reality. Give God praise for this forum. May God bless you. Happy Sabbath.
The constituency of the Guyana Conference of Seventh-day Adventists, along with the administrators and staff and directors, we really would like to say thank you to our three presenters, Dr. Theodore Garnett, for your concise presentation on how vaccines work. We have learned, and I know that because of the data and the knowledge that you have imparted to us, we'll be able to make a decision or a choice as to which way we will go. Is the vaccine safe? Dr. Thomas Bizarro, you have shared your knowledge with us, and I know that what we have learned this evening will help the constituency of the Seventh-day Adventist Church in Guyana to make an informed decision as to whether or not they will take the vaccine. And to Dr. Leal Caesar, you have shown us what is the Seventh-day Adventist perspective on vaccination. And we all have seen that this is not about COVID, but the church has a position on vaccination. And hence, we all can again make a choice as to which way we will go. I know that administrators, directors, and staff, and the constituency would want to say a big thank you for the information that you have shared with us tonight. And on behalf of all of us, I want to wish you God's blessings in your future endeavors. To our moderators, Dr. Barbara Reynolds and Pastor Sion Bastiani, you have taken us through the paces tonight, and we are thankful that you have been there to guide us. You have asked questions and answers were given, and we appreciate what you have done for this evening's program. To the coordinators, the administrators, directors, I want to say a special thank you to Pastor Osley Edwards, one of the main facilitators and the pusher behind this program. You can be assured that the constituency have learned the facts and decisions will be made with the guidance of God. On behalf of all of us, we say thank you, thank you, thank you. And also to those who have joined, we thank you for coming on board and listening, and we trust that the choices that you make will be guided with the help of the Holy Spirit. Thanks to one and all.
need to fear when times of trouble come. Oppression storm beats at your door. No need to fear. No need to fear, though evil seems so strong. Their pride and power is not for long. Be still, my soul, and trust in God, and place your life into His hands, for He will never fail you. And in the morning you'll see His face. No need to fear. Don't fear. No need to fear the envy and the scorn of those who boast in what they own. No need to fear, for what remains when life's brief day is done? Their glories are a setting sun. But as for me, of this I'm sure, God will redeem my soul from death, and He will never fail me. And in the morning I'll see His face. Can tear you from His love, and He will never forsake you. And in the morning you'll see His face. No need to fear. Don't
I invite you to bow your heads with me as we approach the throne of God. Our God in heaven, we thank you for another opportunity to bow in your presence. We thank you, O God, that your Sabbath day have approached, O day of rest and gladness. We're thankful tonight, oh God, that you have allowed your servants, Lord, to share information with us that will help us to make wise decisions. We're thankful for the knowledge that you have imparted to them, and they were willing, Lord, to impart to us. We pray, oh God, that even as we have learned the facts that we will make the decision that you want us to make. Help that each and every one of us, Lord, will consult with you, and your Holy Spirit will guide us in the choices that we make. Tonight, Lord, we pray that you will continue to be with your people. We're thankful that, as the song reminds us tonight, that we have no need to fear, because the God that we serve is able. The God that we serve is all powerful. So even as the pandemic rages, we, oh God, can be confident of this one thing, that you are still in charge. So bless us individually, bless us collectively, bless our families, our relatives, and may, oh God, your light shine out in our lives so that persons will know that we serve a great and mighty God. Bless us now as we part one from the other, Lord. May your Holy Spirit continue to tabernacle with us. And help most of all, God, my prayer tonight is that you will keep each and every one of us faithful. Continue to be with our presenters, oh God, and bless them in their endeavors. And help that all of us, Lord, will continue to walk this Christian pathway that will lead us in the arms of Jesus when you come. We give you praise and we give you thanks. In Jesus' precious name, amen and amen.
Good night, everyone. Thanks for joining us on the platform. We wish you a happy Sabbath. We will sign off after the hymn, Praise Him, Praise Him. God bless you.
Happy Sabbath to my pastor Garnet. I don't know if he's still there, but that's my pastor. Yeah.
Thank you, Dr. Caesar.
Thank you for
Thank you,
including.
Dr. Garnett, Teddy. Good to see you, Dr. Bizarro. Thanks.
Thank you.
Mhm.
Praise Him, Jesus our blessed Redeemer. Sing over His wonderful love proclaim. Hail Him, highest archangels in glory. Strength and honor give to His holy name. Like a shepherd, Jesus will guard His children. In His arms He carries them all day long. Praise Him, tell of His excellent greatness. Praise Him, ever in joyful song. Praise Him, Jesus our blessed Redeemer. For our sins He suffered and bled and died. He our hope of eternal salvation. Hail Him, Jesus the crucified. Shout His praises, Jesus who bore our sorrows. Love unbounded, wonderful, deep and strong. Praise Him, tell of His excellent greatness. Praise Him, ever in joyful song. Praise Him, Jesus our blessed Redeemer.
I don't know what this Whitley song is.
Immortals, how He will set us
Okay,
free.
finish. Go on.
Jesus our Savior, reign forever and ever. Crown Him,
Let's have a thanks.
Bless you now. Have a wonderful Sabbath. Over and out.